visit. It's set to include dining with the royal family and talks with Prime Minister David Cameron a bit later today. Let's take a look at some of the latest pictures that come through of said visit that we've got here at the RT News Centre. Here we go.
No, this room is full of mirrors. Where do you want
Where would you like us?
Just by the fireplace, if you can, Your Majesty. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, to add into what's likely to be talked about today, one prominent British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, published Obama's controversial article in which he urges Britons to remain in the European Union. Should he get involved or not? Let's talk about that. Katie Hopkins is live with us, columnist for Mail Online, the website of the Daily Mail newspaper, and Stephen Hazel is the director of the Global Policy Institute in London. Guys, thanks for being with us. Appreciate your time. Katie, can I come to you first of all? President Obama then arriving in London, quote, on the face of it, to wish Her Majesty the Queen a happy 90th birthday. Very nice touch, but of course, as we all know behind the scenes, a lot more on the agenda too.
Absolutely. And I think overall the sense here, or certainly the sense that I'm getting from people, is really a question about interference. Why have we got an American coming over here to the UK to tell us how to vote on the EU? Why is he splashed across the front of our newspaper telling us that he has a right to have a say because American blood was spilt helping defend us in World War II? And why have we got him telling us that it's good for us to stay as part of Europe because it's good for our lawmaking, it's good for our financial systems, and it's good for our sovereignty, whereas in fact we've given away our sovereignty. We don't have controls over our own laws here in the UK, and we certainly don't have any control over our borders. I think people like me who want to vote to get out of Europe, we don't actually want Obama over here. I'd rather see someone like Donald Trump come over because at least he has a firm line on immigration.
Yeah, Stephen, the argument here is that Barack Obama is pretty much asking Britain to do something that the USA constitutionally wouldn't do. That's to sacrifice its sovereignty. Should he be getting involved in the first place here anyway?
Well, of course he should. He's our major ally. They defended us in the Cold War. American blood has been spilt in Europe in defending Britain. And anyway, why do we want to treat our major ally in such an offhanded manner? It seems that all these folks in this country now are the sort of bitter types who are opposing an American president, even giving his advice to us. I think they've now succeeded in annoying the Americans, annoying the Europeans, and they're basically a bunch of little Englanders who are not big enough to take advice. It's only advice. There's no interference. The American president and Americans don't have a vote in this. We have a vote in it. But surely we can take advice from people like the president, take advice from anybody who wants to give it to us. Let's be grown up about this.
Yeah, Katie, you know, this letter that's been published in the Telegraph, it's prefaced by him saying that he's saying all this in the spirit of friendship. The friendship's been built up over many, many decades. And he brings up the point that, for instance, where he says Britain should stay in the EU because he says it's beneficial for new jobs, for trade, economic growth. There's that lovely transatlantic trade and investment partnership. They're all valid points, aren't they?
I don't know if they're valid points, actually. I don't think it's about the idea that we're little Britain and that we're not prepared to take advice. I'm certainly prepared to take advice. I've listened to people saying that actually Europe is bankrupt. I've listened to the head of the European Commission saying actually we do interfere too much. I just listened to advice from those controlling migration or watching migration come, saying an extra 150 people a day are now arriving again into Greece and into Italy as the milder weather start across the Med. I've listened to people telling us that actually we are infiltrated by Al-Qaeda here in the UK and that our threat of terror at the moment remains severe. And I don't buy into any of the arguments why staying in Europe is a good idea when we can't control our borders. The threat of terror is severe and we're giving over £350 million a day to an institution when our own NHS is bankrupt. And also, why would I take advice from Obama when he's doubled the deficit in his own country during his shocking administration?
Nice quote then from Obama. He says the European Union doesn't moderate British influence, it magnifies it. What do you think about that before I go to Stephen, briefly?
I think he drank too much on Air Force One. I think he just went crazy because for me, they're interfering all over the place. They interfere on human rights. When we want to deport someone, they say, no, you can't deport them. When we want to give a prisoner a life sentence, they say no, because you must give someone hope of redemption. When we want to get rid of criminals that we have in the UK, they say no, because they have a right to a family life. Let them bring their families over. We still can't deport half the people that are here because of Europe, and yet we're still paying them, and our NHS is going under because it has no money left in its system. In Luton, they've just said no more operations for anyone who's fat or who smokes because we can't afford them, and yet we're giving all this money to Europe every day to subsidise whatever pet projects they've got going
Stephen,
on.
a lot of thoughts
I think
there
for us people that want to leave, we've had enough.
Stephen, a lot of thoughts there from Katie. Can you respond to a few of them, because you want to stay?
Yeah, a lot of them aren't. They're all
Europe?
jumbled up. All jumbled up.
Well, try
Sorry?
and pick a few apart.
Well, let's take the business of Al-Qaeda, for instance. Do you think it's possible that without the support of the Americans and our other allies, we'll be able to deal with this big problem around the world? Where do we get this view that this island here is completely on its own and are able to deal with all the challenges of a dangerous global world? Let me take one example here. Do you really think that if we come out of the EU and we have tariff barriers against us and we can't trade into our biggest single market, that will help the economy and therefore help the NHS and therefore help the education system in this country? Not at all. Because if we come out of the EU, we will effectively be blocked from entering the largest single market in the world. So I don't know why we want to do this and cut off our nose to spite our face, all because we have this strange idea that we ought not to cooperate with people in the world. There's not one issue, not one major issue, immigration, terrorism, economics, whatever you want to pick, not one that is not better solved by countries working together rather than working apart, and rather than engaging in all this sort of backstabbing kind of stuff we've had. For instance, we've had Boris Johnson today, the so-called leader of the Out campaign, offending an American president visiting this country and talking about his Kenyan roots.
Stephen, what are you talking about?
When do we stop offending? When do we stop? When do we stop offending foreigners?
This nostalgic nonsense, this kind of idea that it's also glowing if we work together and we wrap our arms around each other. This is complete nonsense. We don't have control of our borders. We don't have anything that's better together. When we have 300,000,
are you a comment?
It's 300,000 people coming into the UK. 300,000 people coming into the UK. In the next 3 years, there won't be enough primary school places for children, and 10,000 school children at the age of 4 and 5 will be without a primary school place. Now, how do you think it's acceptable that we're still allowing our borders to be wide open to the rest of Europe? You still think that's beneficial, that small children won't get an education? I appreciate you're elderly and you have a nostalgic view of the world.
You've asked me a question, I'll answer it. You've asked me a question, I'll answer it. Do you think, what do you think will happen the minute we break our relations with Europe as far as immigration is concerned? The French are going to dump all those people in Calais on our doorstep. There'll be no agreement with our European country. So they will dump and look here. No, Project Fear. You just talked about immigration, trying to frighten people about immigration.
Yeah, and
I'm telling you that immigration is a problem. Well, the French they've said they'll no longer continue that agreement. Why should they continue if agreement if we stab them in the back and walk out of our
depends who you listen to, doesn't it? That was one of the early theories that came through, and then that was abandoned, and the French said no, he kind of wouldn't do that. It has changed a bit, but it's not clear cut.
Yeah, the French have said that won't happen.
Not much.
The French have said it won't happen.
No.
You mentioned Boris Johnson just now.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. If we vote to exit the European Union, we have to have negotiations with our European partners about what kind of relationship we're going to be in. And these negotiations are not going to be easy. We're not going to be able to re-establish relations with the EU overnight. And the reason we can't is because they will need to make sure that other countries don't follow our lead, otherwise the whole thing will break up. Therefore, they'll want to have strong integration on the continent, and they want to have a very tough policy towards us. Now, I don't blame them for that. We've had a contract, we're now breaking it. We'll be the first country to walk out of the largest single market in the world. We must be balmy.
Guys,
absolutely balmy.
Let's get
I
another voice in
don't
here.
think we're not balmy at all.
Economic
Let's get another voice in here, guys.
49% of people...
Guys.
49% of people want to leave the EU. They're not all balmy, darling.
All right, let's listen to Boris Johnson,
Well,
what
let's
he
wait and
thinks
see what the
about the
numbers are.
US and President Obama being here today. You mentioned it just now, Stephen. Let's see the man's words, because we always like a bit of Boris Johnson. To hear a clip from him, here it comes.
I'm very happy for anybody to say whatever they like about Brexit. I just think it paradoxical that the United States, which wouldn't dream of allowing the slightest infringement of its own sovereignty, should be lecturing other countries about the need to enmesh themselves ever deeper in a federal superstate. And so that's the paradox to which I'm drawing attention.
Katie, we're bringing it round to the Obama visit again. Yeah, we know the background here, the arguments back and forth. We're bringing it round to this. And what we're hearing there is Johnson saying that the US is lecturing the UK. What we've also heard back again today from Prime Minister Cameron, on the other hand, says that Britain should listen to advice. It's normal to listen to an ally's thoughts. It should be welcome that, you know, the top guy in America's taking the time to come over here, get involved in what he has said he's doing on a friendly basis, but all Americans looking with extreme interest at what this vote's going to turn out at.
You know, we don't need advice from America on this issue because this is a British issue. I'm 41.
But when it comes to security, Britain looks to NATO. You want to look to America then.
No, my point is that all of my life, I have never had a say in Europe. I have never had a say in being part of this institution which tells me how to live my life, how to spend my money, how my democracy is going to be run, some democracy. I've never had a say. This is my time to have a say. I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote to leave. And I don't need to listen to a gentleman who's come over here after a failed presidency because he wants to share in the limelight of the Queen's birthday. I don't need him now telling me how I should vote when I've lived in this country for 40 years. You can laugh all you like, sir, but
there still aren't enough hard facts out there. If you're a Brit, it's really hard. I'm a Brit myself. It's very hard to know which side to come down on because people raising families, having to put petrol in the car, etc., send their kids to school, buy their clothes. They want to know on a day-to-day basis how exactly this is going to affect them. We've heard both sides. We've heard what's being called scaremongering. We've heard about the short-term almost crash there's going to be.
But that's my
Still a big lack of facts,
about primary school places. That's my point about primary school places. Mothers have just had to enter their small children to primary schools, and that none of them have had their first choice of entry because there aren't enough primary school places here. And that's what migration boils down to. It's about primary school places and places on the NHS.
What Katie, you need to do is to blame the British government.
I don't need advice from you.
Not scapegoat the EU. Look, we've had a government here that's been imposing austerity on the people for many, many years now. And if you talk quite rightly and understandably about the school places and so on, let's mote and beams. Look in your own country. And by the way, when you talk about democracy in the European Union, look at democracy in this country. We have an unelected head of state, unelected upper house, unelected Privy Council, and the House of Commons is elected by a crooked electoral system. We don't have much of a democratic system here to boast about,
A minute ago, you were telling me that I should be able to take advice from anywhere. I should be able to listen to advice, and now you're criticising our Queen one day after her birthday. I don't think that's
I haven't criticised
Even Europe admitted this week that it's overstepped the mark by trying to control people's lives too much, hasn't it?
What is trying to control people's lives?
Even Europe's admitted.
Westminster has a much bigger bureaucracy than the European Union.
And it's trying to control people's lives too much.
We've got to nail. We have to nail this myth. Westminster has a much bigger bureaucracy, huge bureaucracy, Whitehall it's called, than the European Union, which is a relatively slim-line bureaucracy. But over the years, we've allowed these myths to go up.
All of this is so far removed from the daily grind of an individual who gets up at 6, works all day, has to pay their mortgage, hasn't got a place for their child, is queuing to get to the doctors, can't get a same-day doctor's appointment. They don't care what you're banging on about. They don't care about politics. They don't care about
Katie, care about about
They
what
don't
you're
care about
banging
your
on about
bubble.
because you've got no
They
solution.
do. They care
no,
about
you're
having
just
their
trying to
country back.
All right, let's
British
get some more
people want
thoughts.
their
What about
country
the
back,
rest
and we
of
need to get out of
Europe?
Europe.
Emotional
What about the
this.
rest of
when
Europe?
They say, when they say they don't, when you say they don't care about what I'm banging on about, have you thought?
No, they don't.
that a
I don't
strong
care what you're
economy-
banging on about
Oh,
either.
no.
You're just saying
well,
that I have
they only care, Katie,
emotional
what you, a columnist on the
Guys,
Daily Mail, is
let's
banging
broaden it
on
out a
about,
bit. I
do
wonder
they?
what the
Is
rest
that
of
all they
Europe
care
thinks about a
I don't
Brexit
believe
here.
it.
I wonder what the rest of Europe thinks about a Brexit there. The National Front Party's leader in France recently made comment about it. So did Mr. Juncker. Let's listen. Come back to you.
The English people have had enough of the European Union, and it seems the majority want to get rid of this straitjacket. They are nostalgic for their sovereignty. It means the possibility to deal with problems, the problems which they face on a national level, with their own aims, their own thoughts, and their own culture, whatever it concerns, immigration, economy, or any other question.
If I would say now that we have a plan B, this would indicate a kind of willingness of the Commission to envisage seriously that Britain could leave the European Union. We don't have a plan B, we have a plan A. Britain will stay in the European Union as a constructive and active member of the Union.
Just a few thoughts there, Stephen. There would be life after a Brexit. The rest of Europe would get on, wouldn't it?
Sorry, the Brexit.
There would be
what?
life after a Brexit. The rest of Europe would survive, especially Marine Le Pen there, by the sounds of it.
Oh. Yes, everybody's going to survive. No one's saying that, but we're going to take a very big hit, and they won't take an easy one either if we pull out. Because what we're doing, we're disentangling, unilaterally walking away from relationships we've built up over many years now, like a spoilt child who wants to take the stumps home. And it will affect everybody. It'll have a big effect on this country because we're only 60 million consumers. The European Union, with 500 million, will also take a hit, a less important one in my view. But it's a terribly destabilising situation. And Katie may say that, look, the real problems facing British people, they don't understand these big things, and of course they understand.
No, I didn't say that at all.
Katie, why rock the boat if we don't know all the information?
People ought not to be treated like children.
I didn't say
Well,
they
you
don't
did. You
understand it. I
basically
said
it's
there's
nothing
many
to do
more
with them.
important
and
things.
all of this,
No, I
all
didn't
of this,
say,
what you
I
call,
didn't say,
all of this, what you two-bit journalists call, all of this, what you journalists call,
Oh, what you journalists
all of this,
call,
what you
lovely.
journalists call big
I didn't
issues
say they
removed,
don't
have a very
understand.
big effect on people.
Yeah,
Well, we
Kate,
can
what
talk
about
about
you?
it.
Why
idea.
rock the boat? I mean, maybe you might not like the way it's working at the moment, but hey, why step into the unknown, frying pan into the fire, no?
I think the EU needs us far more than we need them. I didn't say people don't understand the issue. I say that issues facing people are far closer to home than Europe. They care about schools, they care about health, they care about their families, they care about jobs. We will be free to trade with all other markets when we're out of the EU. We won't have the EU telling us how we can run our industries and how we can't. Our steel industry, we couldn't help save that recently because of our ties with the European Union. I think once we get out of Europe, we can control our borders, we can control the number of people in this country, we can look after British people first.
Yeah, Stephen, let's look at
and
the
I think
Tata
it will be a
Steelworks
very
in Portal,
positive
but a
thing.
huge story in Britain, a huge story for Wales. So many jobs very much on the line there. Government doesn't really want to privatise, maybe semi-privatise. Government says its hands are tied by the rest of Europe. Couldn't do it even if it wanted to help.
It's exactly
Yes, it could,
right.
of
We
course it
weren't
could.
able
Let's
to
listen to
help our own
Stephen.
industry.
Let's listen to Stephen's
Hold on,
thoughts.
that's a question. No, of course it could. Of course it could. And by the way, the Welsh and the Scottish people are the people who are probably going to vote more heavily for Europe in this coming referendum than the English are. They know where their bread is buttered on this question. Regional aid and all that kind of stuff coming from the European Union is very important to
Wales
them.
and Scotland have
all
wanted devolution from London for a long time.
They have indeed. They have indeed.
Well, they'd want more if they could.
And let me make this point about, and if we pull out of the EU, let me tell you one very big consequence, one very big risk, which we haven't talked about yet. And that is the question that Scotland, the Scottish National Party, which is going to do extremely well in the coming Assembly elections, have virtually said that they do not want to be pulled out of Europe by the English. and consequently they will go for independence if we pull out of the EU. So there, we will have both to have to negotiate a way back into the EU and also have a problem with our own union at home, and that's before we get to the Irish problem that may be set off.
Guys, we've
by our
only got
leaving the
20
EU.
seconds left.
I
I've
don't
got
want
to
to think
Katie
about
for a
that.
last thought on this. Can you answer that? The worry about Britain splitting apart?
I'm not worried about that at all. The Scottish have already had their referendum, which the gentleman may not remember. And as you will recall, they voted to stay with the Union. They'll stay as part of Great Britain. But what I think we have to remember is that 50% of the population over here want to vote to get out. 50% of the population probably don't want to hear what Obama has to say. And 50% of this population care about looking after British people first. And that is not remaining part of the EU.
Guys,
and
I'm afraid
I have had the last
we've
say,
got to
and I'm glad.
leave it. Yeah, but only because we're out of time. If there's another 10 seconds, I'll be back across to Stephen. Katie
Not a
Hopkins,
chance. Not a
Stephen
chance.
Hazler, thank you.